Hello, I'm Solaris, and I'm sure, as you've tuned in today, is for glorious ship combat. So, to start us off, it's the Eidolon versus the Zaza on Light, and this was a match between me and Mr. Pinecone Appletree. Well, Mr. I don't know for sure. But it's a mirror match between two Avoider fast walls. Specifically fast walls, but Avoiders works too. And this is interesting, because you see both of these ships are about mitigating damage and dancing around, so they can both disengage, as I covered in the last video. But the difference here is that my ship is faster, it has more thrusters, and his has more shields and armor. So basically, I have to be very careful because he wins essentially instantly if I'm not careful, because he can just tank more, so I can't go on a head-on-head fight, and I have to dance around, which is why we're both auto-firing at maximum range at all times. And, trying to avoid rocks and just overall trying to eke out an advantage ever so slowly. So you'll see it takes quite some time to actually score any first blood for either of us because we are so actively spreading the damage. And there he goes, he gets some damage there. But it's only one blaster. And so the thing that needs to be paid attention to is because there's so much armor, you can't actually aim at the reactors. You have to aim for the, in between the reactors, because they are typically less well shielded. Well, it's harder for the shields to remain supplied in those areas. So as you can see on my left side, in between the two reactors, it's damaged on his left side too, in between the two reactors, closer to one. And he has larger gaps in between his outermost reactors, whereas mine are mostly consistent. So as you can see, we're both trying to be safe, playing it carefully, and ideally, he's kind of in a positive situation over me right now, because I've taken slightly more damage. There you can see, 1% more. I've lost more weapons than him. So I have to figure out how to deal more damage without taking more damage just by playing from behind. And, clearly it's very difficult because this match has been going on. Typically matches are closer to blitzes, like they're nowhere near this long, because once you engage, you can't disengage, but we're very actively doing that. Now, I don't know about his ship, but my ship can auto-fire its weapons at all times. So if I get into range, I should theoretically have an advantage. And the only reason I ever do stop auto-firing is to synchronize my weapons again, because you want to have your weapons synchronized to pierce shields. Once they're synchronized, of course, they all hit at the same time, and when they hit at the same time, it has more burst and can penetrate the shields. In fact, this effect is so necessary and pronounced that the blasters I switched to synchronized fire. Normally you want alternating because it's more consistent, safer, effective, but with this, you actually want to switch to synchronized because it's the best way to reasonably deal damage at all times. So as you can see, mine's has less thrust. So a part of the reasoning for that is that because the ship is so off balanced on my end, it makes it so that the rearmost thruster sections that jut out a little bit are harder to utilize, and your ship has to fire the leftmost and rightmost thrusters to counterbalance if you utilize those. So there's an argument that you don't actually want them, which clearly Pine has taken advantage of here and is using a different sort of design with 4 large reactors instead of mine with 3 larges and 3 mediums. And so his is more efficient, but mine is more space efficient and utilizes the reactors a little bit differently. So what I'm trying to do is hit that reactor, his, because it's exposed, and even though I've taken a little bit more damage, the reactor, which I've now highlighted, is at half health, and if I can shoot that, suddenly I have a huge advantage because he has a gaping hole. And a thing about his ship is it only has 1 control room, whereas mine has 3. So if I can get to control room in between the 2 centermost reactors, then I instantly win. But if he gets one of my control rooms, then I'm certainly damaged, but not down for the count. So if I can get the reactor, I'm in a better position than he is. So that's what I'm trying to do, and he's aware of this, so he's rotating that side of the ship away from me and trying to prevent me from targeting it. And is trying to push me away with the dissuasive fire. And some might call these matches boring, but I think they're always super cool, because Pine was also one of the older players that is well experienced with this and is never an easy opponent to fight. Always a nuisance. In fact, I would argue that Pine is one of the largest nuisances out there to try and fight. So he's very good at not dying, which is unfortunate for me. So yeah, even though this match might seem boring, it's actually kind of very intense because you have to always be paying attention, and as you just saw, any single mistake can be massive in terms of implications. So now, I just need to get a good angle, a clear shot at the control room, and I win. So now I can play a little bit more aggressively because he both has less weapons, so he can't trade fire as effectively, and because if I get the right angle, or I can force him into undesirable angles, and now that I turned it off, he was out of ship control. Okay, so now for the same match, the Eidolon versus the Zaza on Light, because we were sparring for a while, which is using the same ships against each other. And now in this match, you can instantly see I'm using the rock to my advantage, because he cannot chase effectively, and he cannot angle his ship effectively because the rocks are in the way. So he's already taking damage, whereas I can angle a little bit better. Like, I'm still taking damage, but it seems to be the case that it's superior for me, of course. And I'm doing the same thing again, where you can do this evasive, like, curving maneuver, since you have the maneuverability, and you can, if necessary, of course, you can rotate away, and suddenly you are now out of range, and you can let your shields regenerate, your weapons regenerate, etc. You can actually just disengage with the rock. So it's very useful. An important part of using these ships, of course, is knowing how to take advantage of your surroundings, which can even include, if the opponent has two ships, using your opponent's body as a shield from the other one. Which doesn't happen super often, but is always a great idea if you can. So you might be wondering, why are those lasers like firing off randomly? And lasers fire at crew for some reason. They used to be able to mine your ship, but no longer the case. And right here we were probably talking, because this was like casual, so if you are both out of range you can just send messages and whatnot. So it should be resuming now, because we're both moving towards each other again. But Pine might have been positioning such that the rocks were no longer nearby. I'd been practicing with them more, maybe he wasn't as comfortable with them, etc. So now he's constantly leaning away, because you can see the damage part is further away from me, because if I were to shoot through it, then I can do more damage because there's no shields to protect it. So at this point I was just targeting the same in between the reactors area, because that's where the most weapons are, so I can do the most relevant damage by firing at that area. So now Pine is trying to get closer, trying to force his greater defenses against me. And I'm firing back at this point, because it kind of seems like I'm in a bad situation at this point, so I'm trying to not disengage, because I have relatively more disruptors, I think. So as long as I don't disengage and I have an advantage, I can always force him to be offline, which is why he's trying to gain space again. And it's kind of where having more shields is a negative, because if I just shut them all down with the disruptors, then you just can't fight back because the crew are too busy powering the shields, which of course is a argument from a crew management perspective to prioritize weapons over shields, one of them anyway. So now I'm trying to damage as many of the weapons as I can, and my ships are split. That's kind of an issue. So now I'm trying to get control over them, because it's difficult to rearrange, get them back under control. And I think there was connection issues, so I paused it and unpaused it and whatnot to let that play out, which I cut out because it was boring. So now, okay, so this is interesting. I need to get both ships to be fighting at all times, because otherwise they can both be picked off. And though this looks bad, I actually took off a ton of his weapons. So effectively, I'd say we're evenly matched, given, mostly. And this is one of the advantages of having more control rooms, even if it's a lot less cost efficient, is that you can be, you can survive after losing one, after being split apart, because his ship, if I cut it in half at any given point, only the half with the control room can actually move and survive. Whereas mine, every thruster segment can survive by itself, and the, weapon attached to it. So I accidentally got too close, I let that one get too close, so I have to back it up while moving the other one forward. Because I want them to be engaging at the same time as always. So this is something I actually have a lot of practice with. Typically, when this happens, it's like a really bad sign, because normally people aren't experienced with both control patterns, RTS and direct control, because you have to use RTS here. It's the only way to control multiple ships. Fortunately, I've practiced, so I was able to effectively get control and control them mostly. As you can see, the other one's stuck on the rock. Unfortunately, Pine didn't capitalize, but it was stuck on the rock for a frightening amount of time. Egregious, really. So as you can see, I'm always keeping the two halves or thirds together so that they can always fight together, because otherwise they're going to have huge issues of one just being picked off. So Pine is trying to separate them, I'm trying to keep them together, and always engaging at the same time. And I'm not flanking. In other circumstances against slower opponents, I would definitely be flanking, but the issue is his ship is so fast and good at reacting and responding that one could get jumped on and isolated. And then while the other one is trying to catch up and help its sister, it would get picked off and die. And then it would be an even worse position. So Pine's trying to consider what to do, I'm trying to figure out what to do, and I'm flanking a little bit. Not too much, because, clearly they get separated like what's happened here. So now one of them is being fired at, and it can't tank all those weapons as effectively. So it's trying to get back to its sister so that the other one can start drawing fire and threatening fire, because I think at this point I actually have more weapons. Even if I have lower durability, less ship left, so to speak, because you can see the health bars at the top. So now I'm hiding behind the asteroid to force a disengagement, just to reassess, reconfigure. And it's very tense. I don't recall what happens here. So Pine is still trying to consider how to approach, I think, because I'm doing too good of a job keeping them from being isolated, and he's trying to figure out how to, isolate them. As is, it's too difficult to try and engage one of them at a given time, so it's... Yeah, because in fact this might be a little bit better than just a normal arrangement, because as soon as one is threatened, the other one can step in while it backs up and breathes. Whereas normally the best you can do is tilt that half away, so in a certain sense this might be superior. So this is one of the other downsides, is that they can body block the other, and suddenly you can't use all of your weapons at once, which I got out of the way decently quickly, but it is a huge pitfall that takes a lot of practice to get to not be subjected to. Which ideally, if you're in Pine's position, you should always be trying to do is get them in between one another, because that way you're only fighting one of them at a time, which is really good. So at this point I was still targeting weapons, trying to strip all of them off, so I think there's only the right flank at this point, and the other one got isolated, and I can just uselessly fire at thrusters with the other one, and I think I'm going to lose the other one here because Pine's remaining weapons are all firing at the thruster segment, and I'm trying to pick out the control room to no avail, and he got the control room, so now it's his ship versus my ship. So it's looking a little bit bad, I think. But he's spending a lot of time in the Ring of Death. Well, as am I, but him more so. So it's pretty decent, I think, all things considered. And because he was tilted at such an angle with his weakened armor, I could actually get a reactor there. Which unfortunately didn't do much, but it was a huge moral victory, of course. And now because of the asteroid, he has to spend even more time inside of the rod, or outside of the Ring of Death, to specify, to be clear. So he actually has effectively lower HP than I do, despite, him not having lower HP than I do. So I'm trying to get close here because that way I can fire at the reactor and shut off most of his remaining weapons. And I'm taking too much damage. I think this is definitely a risky gambit that I'm not sure was worth it. Well, of course now it just paid off, so of course it was worth it. And he only has 2 blasters and 2 disruptors. And I have, I think, more disruptors, so I can actually shut those off and he can't fire back. Like, as you can see, the shields are all offline, the weapons are offline, and it's just becoming a problem for him because he's running out of weapons and can't actually break through my shields anymore, but I can still break through his and target his weapons down. So he can't fight back anymore, so I think it's pretty much decided. I just have to get through those 2 weapons to confirm it, of course. Okay, so he has no more weapons and I can just fire at him. He could try pushing me out of the ring of death, but I can just shoot at him the entire time and he forfeits. So, next up we have my ship, the Sunburst, which I've featured many times, versus Redstones, the Torch, version 2, of course. So, Redstones has a fairly rotating prism, which we were testing how these were kind of buggy, so unfortunately he's in a worse off position just from the get-go. And as a discerning viewer should know, they have less damage, because every combination takes off extra damage. So mine has 6 output beams and he only has 1, so he has less damage. But the alternative to this is that he can aim, so as you can see I have to rotate my ship entirely, but he can aim. And he also has 8 large shields, and shields are good against ions. So ions are about dealing constant damage, constantly melting away at your opponent. But large shields shields in general, can be given energy and then they're back up to full HP. So shields are really good against ions, and he has more than I do, even if I have more weapons than he does. He also has more thrusters against my heavier ship that he can't really outmaneuver. He can't leverage those thrusters very effectively. So he's kind of in a worse matchup, because heavier ships beat lighter ships in mirror matches. Most of the time, anyway. If he was fast enough, he could just outspeed me. But currently, he's just losing a lot of health in the corners of his ship. Like around the shields. Like I can't get through the shields, but I can shoot around them. So as long as I keep doing that, eventually I'll get through all of his weapons, and I keep trying to force him to ram me to like get in a staring match, as they're called, because I know I'll win because of the armor. But he knows this as well, and he is leveraging his huge thrust to rotate and force me to prevent me from getting rams off that would almost certainly win. Because, as you know, large shields can't project through armor, including your opponents. So if I get close enough, I only have to contend with like 2 or 3 large shields as opposed to all 8. So now I'm backing up, because backing up allows me to better control what I'm actually aiming at. Because if I ram him, he can just rotate and suddenly I'm not aiming at the same thing anymore. But if I back up, I can always focus on what I'm aiming at. And he knows this, so he's also backing up. Disengaging, letting his shields recharge too, I'm sure. Because, shields are very hungry. And you can get through them with enough time if you stress them for long enough. But that's why they're kind of good against ions, is because you can just back off and they regenerate instantly. You've made no progress. And then your opponent has done so much armor damage. Like, I've lost a ton of armor. Like, huge amounts of armor. Like, layers of it is just gone. But this has a trade-off. My ship actually has 2 disruptors, sorry. They were name changed a while back. So my ship has 2 disruptors, and the more armor you take off, the more exposed those are. So now if I get close enough, I can actually use those to take down the shields. Which 2 disruptors might not sound like a lot, but it can be huge. And now I'm focusing on his shields effectively enough that he has to rotate to shield the open ones, exposed ones, that have been knocked down. But when he does this, I can just rotate and start shooting around the active shields. And then I'm shooting at his unshielded parts. Okay, so he actually got through my shields, which was why I was rotating there. And it was kind of scary, kind of frightening. But now I'm forcing him, well, he's actively choosing to do this because he thinks he can get the mirror match for the scan contest, and I'm starting to break through his shields too, because disruptors. And there goes his reactors. Oh, I do love the explosions. And that was remarkably close. As you can see, he got one of my large shields, and if he got through the small shield, he would have won. Next up, we have Bob Phil's ship, that one, versus One Eye's ship, that one, which is a traditional BC rammer versus a somewhat traditional ion kite. Can't say I'm too fond, because, ion kites kind of bad. But, the reason I started that relatively early while the ships were far away from each other is because Bob made an unfortunate mistake of hiding right next to the asteroid. And the thing is, when you do that, you block yourself. You can't actually aim at the other ship, so One Eye was able to use it as a shield. And the second thing is that Bob has reverse thrusters that are huges, and huges have a huge ramp up time, so he didn't actually warm them up, which means that they took too long to turn on, and then One Eye was able to just jump up on top of him while they were ramping up and just couldn't get away. So now, the next match. It is my ship, the Scion of Glory, versus, the deck cannon rammer. And this is interesting because he has a ton of armor, and nukes are good at punching through armor, but only if they're aimed. So I have to figure out how to get a proper aiming section off on him. But he is aware of this and will be trying to actively avoid that, because he can very effectively dodge the nukes, or reorient them. He can't dodge them, but primarily I was talking about reorienting them so that they didn't line up and pierce through his ship. And as you can see, all that armor damage and shield damage, it just didn't do anything. Effectively he took no damage there, even though I stripped away some of his health. It's he doesn't care. Who cares? And again, those nukes, they all hit, but it didn't matter because none of them did any damage. So I got pinned against the rock and I forfeit. So we're doing the same match again. I was determined that I could win this, so I did it several times, and this is the next bout. So One Eye, I'd say, has the slight advantage, and here I didn't line the shots up again, so I took damage and he didn't. It looks like he took damage, but he didn't. He just really doesn't care. He might have lost a single deck cannon, but it's a single deck cannon. Whereas I'm already losing tons of nukes, lots of nukes, and I'm pinned against the rock, so I can't escape. And after I take enough damage, I just don't have enough firepower to do anything. It's even though all those nukes hit and I took out some thrusters, he still doesn't care. Why would he? So it's this. Effectively, I cut his arm off, but he's actively ripping out internals of my ship. It's he couldn't care less that he lost an arm, because he still has the other one, and is wielding a mighty club that is caving my skull in, unfortunately, for me. So I forfeit again. And it is round 3. Because, like I said, I'm determined I can win this. I like testing matchups like this, where you just go again and again, where I try different things, because, well, it's one of the funnest things about this game for me, is that, with enough piloting, presumably you can win your way through it. You can pilot your way out of any situation into a victory from any situation. So One Eye, all too content to keep doing this, I might add, kind of suspicious if you ask me, continues to butcher me, for lack of a better word, and here I finally get a better angle of the nukes, and it works. See, that's the power of actually lining things up. So, once more, because I want to prove that it's consistent, of course, because there's no point in winning if you can't make it consistent. So now that I've proved it's possible, I need to prove it's reproducible. And One Eye, of course, always great for sparring, great player, fun player, is again going at it with his traditional deck cannon rammer. And the third participant is just happy to watch. Because, who wouldn't? It's glorious. This is typically how fast matches go. So One Eye knows that once I angle like that, I can be a huge problem. So I use the boost. My ship has boost to get close enough to force the opponent to run into the nukes. So I was able to do that. I didn't line it up properly that I took out his control room, but I did take out a lot of deck cannons, enough that it actually hurts and hinders him. as well as some of the thrust. And my nukes are rearmed again. I refilled the ammo, and now that's a great lineup shot. So I didn't take him out, but I did separate his weapons. So think of it as cutting off both of his arms here. So he's still alive, but he can't actually hurt me in any way. So he's going to run. I'm going to use my side armament of small lasers to fire at him a little bit to no avail. So he's still technically alive, but he lost. So I guess I win. And I'm slowly defusing the corpse because it can shoot at me. Because this is important. If you lose, you need to forfeit. Otherwise your corpse will kill players that ignore it. So you kind of always need to forfeit after losing. I must insist. If you're in one of these like duel arrangements of elimination, you have to forfeit after losing. Otherwise you will kill people. So, Cyano Glory, this is the second match for this match, versus Deadly Passion Cruise, unnamed and untested ship. So his ship wasn't fast enough. As you can see here, I was able to line up the nukes with no issue, and it just cuts through him. So he had the proper combinations, had tons of armor, tons of shields, but if you can't actually spread the nukes or dodge the nukes, they will cut through you. There's just nothing you can do. And I win.